It's December 20th, 1943, 1:47 p.m., somewhere over Bremen, Germany. 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown is flying his first combat mission as an aircraft commander, and everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. His B-17F, tail number 425394, nicknamed Ye Olde Pub, just took a direct hit from an 88mm flak shell. The number 2 engine is dead. The number 4 engine is burning. The oxygen system is destroyed. Half his crew is wounded or dead. This was supposed to be a milk run. The 379th Bomb Group launched from Kimbleton, England, at 10:15 a.m. 21 B-17s in formation, heading for the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen. Standard strategic bombing mission. Drop your bombs, maintain formation, fly home. Brown's crew had trained for months. They knew the drill. But nobody trained them for what happened when the formation got separated. German fighters hit them over the target. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, coming in from all angles. The B-17s in Brown's group scattered. Some went down immediately. Others limped away, trying to catch up with the main formation. Brown's bomber got isolated, alone. No protective formation. No overlapping fields of fire from other bombers' guns. Just one B-17 against the entire Luftwaffe. The German fighters swarmed. First pass, cannon fire ripped through the nose, killing the bombardier instantly. The navigator, Second Lieutenant Al Sadok, took shrapnel in his leg. Second pass. The tail gunner's position got shredded. Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode was hit multiple times, barely conscious, slumped over his guns. Third pass. The ball turret gunner's oxygen line severed. He was suffocating in his cramped sphere beneath the bomber, unable to communicate, unable to bail out. Then the flak batteries opened up. At 27,000 feet, the 82mm shells burst in black clouds around them. One detonated close enough to blow out chunks of the fuselage. The plexiglass nose cone, already cracked from fighter fire, shattered completely. Winter air at -40 degrees Fahrenheit blasted into the cockpit. Brown's face went numb instantly. Number 4 engine burst into flames. Brown hit the fire suppression system. Nothing. The engine kept burning, trailing black smoke. He throttled it back, feathered the prop, prayed it wouldn't explode and take the wing with it. Number 2 engine was already dead, windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. That left him 2 functioning engines out of 4. On a fully loaded B-17, 2 engines meant you were going down. Slowly, but definitely going down. The rudder controls were damaged. The bomber wanted to spin to the right, constantly. Brown had to physically force the yoke left just to maintain straight flight. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Spencer "Pinky" Luke, was helping him wrestle the controls, both of them leaning into it with everything they had. They were 400 miles deep into German territory. No fighter escort, no formation. A crippled bomber limping west at 170 miles per hour, losing altitude, trailing smoke. Every German fighter pilot in northern Germany knew exactly where they were. Brown made a decision. They couldn't bail out. Half the crew was wounded, the ball turret gunner was trapped, and they were over enemy territory anyway. Parachuting into Germany meant POW camp if you were lucky, execution if you weren't. Their only chance was to fly this wreck back to England, 400 miles, over enemy territory, in a bomber with 200 holes in it. The odds were 0. Hey, real quick before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country, and what time is it where you are right now? I love seeing how global this community is. All right, let's keep going. The damage was catastrophic. Brown did a mental inventory as they limped westward, and every system he checked made the situation worse. Hydraulics, destroyed. That meant no power to the turrets. The waist gunners, Staff Sergeant Alex Yelisanko and Sergeant Samuel Blackford, were manually traversing their 50 caliber machine guns, trying to track enemy fighters without power assistance. In the frozen air at altitude, their hands were going numb. Electrical system. Failing. The intercom was dead. Brown couldn't communicate with half his crew. He had no idea if the tail gunner was alive or dead. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Richard Pechote, had finally managed to hand-crank his turret to the top position and climb out, gasping for air. He'd been minutes from suffocating. Oxygen system. Completely destroyed. The crew was down to walk-around bottles, portable oxygen tanks meant for emergencies. At 27,000 feet, without oxygen, you had maybe 30 seconds of useful consciousness before hypoxia set in. Brown had already descended to 11,000 feet, trading altitude for breathable air. That put them in range of every flak battery in Germany. The nose section was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The entire plexiglass cone had been shot away. The wind screaming through the opening was so violent that Brown and Luke could barely see. Ice was forming on every exposed surface. The bombardier, Second Lieutenant Donald Gott, was dead in the shattered nose. Navigator Al Sadok was trying to plot a course to England while bleeding from his leg wound, working by touch because his charts kept blowing away. Fuel situation. Critical. Number 4, engine's fuel line had been hit before Brown shut it down. They'd been hemorrhaging aviation gas for the last 20 minutes. Brown calculated they had maybe 90 minutes of fuel remaining. England was 400 miles away. At 170 miles per hour, that was 2 hours and 20 minutes of flight time. The math didn't work. They were going to run out of fuel over the North Sea. Brown kept flying. What else could he do? Behind them, at Jever Airfield in northwest Germany, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was climbing into his Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6. He'd just landed from a mission, barely had time to refuel, when the alert came through. American bomber. Crippled. Heading west. Alone. Stigler was 28 years old, a veteran fighter pilot with 27 confirmed kills. He needed one more to earn the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. One more kill. And the Americans had just gift-wrapped it for him. He took off at 2:10 p.m., pointed his 109 west, and pushed the throttle forward. The Daimler-Benz DB605 engine roared. Top speed, 386 miles per hour. He'd catch the B-17 in minutes. This was going to be easy. A crippled bomber, no escort, limping along at low altitude. Stigler would come up from behind, aim for the tail section where the gunner was likely dead or wounded, fire a burst from his 20mm cannons and twin 13mm machine guns, and watch the bomber disintegrate. His 28th kill, his Knight's Cross, his name in the history books. He spotted the B-17 at 2:17 p.m., about 6 miles ahead, trailing smoke. Stigler closed the distance, dropped down to the bomber's altitude, positioned himself for the attack run. Then he saw inside the aircraft. Stigler pulled his Bf-109 alongside the B-17, about 20 feet off the bomber's right wing. Close enough to see everything, and what he saw stopped him cold. The tail gunner's position was destroyed. Stigler could see blood on the shattered plexiglass. The waist gunners weren't even manning their weapons. They were tending to wounded crew members. Through the gaping hole where the nose cone used to be, Stigler could see the navigator slumped over his table, clearly wounded. The entire right side of the fuselage was perforated with holes. Hundreds of them, some the size of his fist. This wasn't a bomber. This was a coffin with wings. Stigler had grown up in Bavaria before the Nazi Party took over. He'd trained as a fighter pilot in the Luftwaffe, when honor still meant something, when the old guard like Oberstleutnant Gustav Rödel still commanded squadrons. Rödel had pulled Stigler aside once, early in the war, and said something Stigler never forgot. "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." Rödel meant it. There were rules, unwritten rules that separated soldiers from murderers. You didn't shoot men in parachutes. You didn't strafe lifeboats. You didn't machine gun wounded men on the ground. Those weren't enemy combatants anymore. They were just men trying to survive. Stigler looked at the B-17 again. The crew was helpless. They had no fighter escort, no formation. Half their guns weren't even functional. The men inside weren't fighting anymore. They were just trying to stay alive long enough to reach England. Shooting them would be murder. Stigler had 27 kills. He'd earned everyone in honest combat, dogfights where both sides had a chance. This wasn't combat. This was execution. He moved his Bf-109 closer, right off the bomber's wing. Brown, in the pilot's seat, saw him and expected cannon fire. Instead, Stigler waved. Not a salute. Not a friendly gesture. Just acknowledgement. I see you. I'm not going to kill you. Then Stigler did something that could have gotten him court-martialed and shot. He positioned his Bf-109 in tactical escort formation, flying close enough to the B-17 that German ground crews would think the bomber was a captured aircraft being escorted to a Luftwaffe airfield. He was using his presence to protect them. Brown couldn't believe what he was seeing. A German fighter, flying formation with them, not attacking, escorting. The B-17 flew over German flak positions. Normally, the 80mm batteries would have opened fire immediately, but the gun crews saw Stigler's Bf-109 right alongside the bomber and held their fire. They assumed this was a friendly escort bringing in a captured American aircraft. Stigler was deliberately creating that illusion. He stayed with them for 10 minutes. 10 minutes over German territory, burning fuel, putting his own life at risk. If another German fighter showed up, if anyone reported what he was doing, he was finished. Desertion, treason, aiding the enemy, the SS would execute him. But Stigler kept flying. He guided them northwest, toward the coast, toward the North Sea, toward England. When they reached the German coastline, Stigler pulled alongside one more time. Brown and Luke stared at him through the shattered cockpit. Stigler looked back, made eye contact, and gave them a crisp salute. Then he peeled away, banked hard right, and disappeared into the clouds. Brown and Luke sat in stunned silence. They'd just been escorted to safety by an enemy fighter pilot who could have, should have, killed them. Neither of them spoke about it. Not to each other, not to their crew, not to their commanding officers when they landed at seething England 90 minutes later, the B-17 running on fumes. Because if they told anyone, the official report would say a German fighter escorted them. And that would raise questions, suspicions, accusations of collaboration. It was easier to say nothing. Stigler landed back at Yever, refueled, and never mentioned the incident. Not to his squadron mates, not to his commanding officer, not in his combat log. He'd just thrown away his 28th kill, his Knight's Cross, his place in history, and he never regretted it. Ye Olde Pub crossed the North Sea at 3,000 feet, barely maintaining altitude. Brown had both functioning engines pushed to maximum continuous power. The fuel gauges were reading empty. The bomber was vibrating so badly from structural damage that Brown thought the wings might fold. They spotted the English coast at 3:42 p.m., the white cliffs near Lowestoft. Brown had never been so happy to see land, but they weren't safe yet. He had no hydraulics, which meant no brakes, no flaps, no landing gear extension. He'd have to crank the gear down manually and hope it locked in place. Luke grabbed the manual gear crank and started pumping. 50 cranks to get the main gear down. His arms were screaming. The gear indicators showed green. Locked. Probably. Brown radioed seething airfield on emergency frequency. His voice was hoarse from breathing frozen air for 2 hours. This is Army 25394. Battle damage. Hydraulics gone. Coming in hot. The tower cleared them for immediate landing. Emergency crews were already rolling. Brown lined up on the runway, no flaps to slow him down, no way to abort if the gear collapsed. The B-17 hit hard. The landing gear held. But without brakes, they were rolling fast. Brown cut the engines, tried to ground loop the bomber to scrub off speed. The tailwheel dug into the grass beside the runway. The Olde Pub spun 90 degrees and stopped. Silence. The engines ticked as they cooled. Brown's hands were still gripping the yoke. They'd made it. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft. When they saw the damage, they stopped counting holes at 200. The tail section looked like Swiss cheese. The nose was gone. Half the control cables were severed. One mechanic turned to Brown and said, "How the hell did you fly this thing home?" Brown didn't have an answer. The after-action debriefing was standard. Brown reported the flak damage, the fighter attacks, the casualties. He mentioned they'd been harassed by German fighters on the way back. That was it. He never mentioned Stigler. Never mentioned the Escort. The intelligence officer wrote down heavy fighter opposition and moved on. Why didn't Brown report it? Because it sounded insane. A German fighter pilot escorted us to safety. Sure, Lieutenant. And did he also give you a hug and a thermos of hot cocoa? But there was another reason. If Brown reported it, the Army Air Force would investigate. They'd want to know if Brown had signaled the German pilot, if there had been any collaboration, if Brown had given away intelligence. The whole thing would become a mess of suspicion and accusations. Easier to say nothing. Stigler faced the same calculation. He landed at Yever, filled out his flight log. Combat patrol, no contact. His commanding officer never questioned it. Stigler went back to flying missions. He shot down 3 more Allied aircraft before the war ended, bringing his total to 30 confirmed kills, earning his Knight's Cross in March 1944. But he never told anyone about December 20th, 1943. Not his wingmen, not his friends. Because if anyone found out he'd let an American bomber escape, the consequences would be immediate. Court-martial, execution. The Luftwaffe was still professional in 1943, but the SS was everywhere. Stigler knew pilots who'd been arrested for less. Both men carried the secret. Brown in England, then back to the United States after completing his tour. Stigler in Germany, through the final collapse of the Third Reich, through the chaos of surrender in May 1945. They both survived the war. Brown went home to West Virginia. Stigler, like thousands of German pilots, ended up in Canada, working as a machinist in Vancouver. And for 46 years, neither man said a word. Charlie Brown came home to West Virginia, got married, had a family. He didn't talk about the war much. Most veterans didn't. But he never forgot the German fighter pilot who'd spared his life. It haunted him. Who was that man? Why did he do it? Was he even still alive? Franz Stigler emigrated to Canada in 1953, started over, built a life in Vancouver, working as a machinist, then as an engineer. He married, raised a family, became a Canadian citizen. He never mentioned his Luftwaffe service, not even to his wife. The war was over. The past was past. But he remembered the B-17, the shattered nose, the wounded crew, the decision he'd made at 11,000 feet over Germany. In 1986, Brown retired. He had time to think, time to wonder, and that German pilot kept coming back to him. 43 years had passed. The Cold War was ending. The old hatreds were fading. Brown decided he had to know. He wrote a letter, not to any official organization, to a newsletter called Jagerblatt, a publication for former Luftwaffe pilots. Brown described the incident, December 20th, 1943, Bremen, a Bf-109 escorting a damaged B-17 to the coast. He gave the date, the location, the details. He asked, "Does anyone know who this pilot was?" The letter circulated through the Luftwaffe veteran community. Most ignored it. Some thought it was a hoax. But in January 1990, in Vancouver, Franz Stigler was reading his copy of Jagerblatt and saw Brown's letter. He read it 3 times. The date was right. The location was right. The details matched exactly. After 46 years, the American pilot was looking for him. Stigler picked up the phone, called the number Brown had included in the letter. A woman answered. Brown's wife. Stigler asked to speak with Charlie Brown. Brown came to the phone. Stigler said, "I was the pilot in the 109. Silence on the line. Then Brown asked a question only the real pilot would know. What position were you flying when you came alongside? Stigler didn't hesitate. Right wing, about 20 feet off. I could see everything inside your aircraft. Brown's voice cracked. It was you. They talked for 4 hours. Brown in West Virginia, Stigler in Vancouver. 2 old men, former enemies, reliving the most important moment of their lives. They discovered they lived less than 200 miles apart. Brown drove to Vancouver the next week. They met face to face for the first time since December 20th, 1943. Brown was 68 years old. Stigler was 75. They embraced like brothers. From 1990 until their deaths, Brown in 2008, Stigler in 2008, just 8 months apart, they were inseparable. They attended air shows together, gave talks at military history conferences. Their families became close. They'd call each other every week just to talk. Brown said once, "Franz didn't just save my life that day. He saved my crew. He saved my family that wouldn't have been born. He saved my grandchildren. He saved all of us." Stigler said, "I didn't think of Charlie as the enemy that day. I saw men who needed help, that's all." This is why the story matters. Not because it's exceptional, but because it shouldn't be. War doesn't erase humanity, it tests it. And on December 20th, 1943, at 11,000 feet over Germany, a Luftwaffe pilot looked at an enemy bomber and saw human beings. He chose honor over glory, mercy over victory, humanity over hate. And 46 years later, that choice gave both men a friendship that lasted until the day they died.